Stone saints and angels have been whispering secrets for 700 years. This is the mystery of the Sculptor's Cipher, a hidden language carved into medieval statues that spoke without a single written word. In an age where few could read, these visual narratives taught entire communities through gesture, symbol, and silent story. By the end of this journey, you will possess the tools to read these stone manuscripts yourself, unlocking a lost language of art and faith. We will explore how a simple flower could signify purity, how a gesture could convey a blessing, and how modern technology is helping us hear these voices once again. What hidden messages do you think are waiting in plain sight, just waiting to be understood? Walking into a 14th century cathedral was like stepping inside a massive, illuminated manuscript. For the vast majority of people who could not read a single word, these soaring stone spaces were their library, their cinema, and their school. The walls themselves preached. Every sculpted saint and every painted window panel was a page in a vast visual textbook designed to be read and understood by all. This was not art for art's sake. It was a sophisticated communication system. Guilds of highly skilled sculptors and masons were the intellectual engineers of this system. They competed fiercely for the most prestigious commissions, not just to showcase technical skill, but to create the most powerful and evocative visual sermons. Their work was layered with meaning. A casual observer might see a beautiful statue, but a knowledgeable viewer could read an entire theological thesis in the curve of a hand or the fold of a robe. Art historian Emile Mail described these works as deliberate compositions, each element placed with purpose to engage both the heart and the mind. Take Saint Peter, for instance. He is almost always shown holding a set of keys. This was not a random accessory. Those keys were a universally understood symbol of his role as the gatekeeper to heaven, a direct reference to biblical passages and a clear sign of papal authority. There was no need for a written label. The keys said it all. Similarly, a sculpture of the Virgin Mary would often show her with a gentle, downturned gaze and a hand placed over her heart. This specific posture was an immediate visual cue for compassion, sorrow, and maternal love, designed to evoke a powerful emotional response from any viewer, regardless of their native language or social status. This visual shorthand became a universal language. It allowed a complex story to be told and understood by a diverse crowd of peasants, merchants, and nobles all at once, fostering a shared identity and a common faith. So if we only listen to the written records of history, we are hearing just one side of a much richer conversation. What if we learned to listen to the stone voices, to read the gestures and symbols that spoke directly to the medieval soul? To do that, we need the key to their code. This silent language was the Sculptor's Cipher, a complex system of symbols and gestures that formed a complete visual vocabulary. It was not a single, secret code, but rather a shared and widely understood method of communication. Think of it as the emojis of the medieval world, but with a far richer and more serious purpose. Every element, from the tilt of a head to the animal resting at a figure's feet, was a deliberate choice loaded with meaning. This code drew from a deep well of sources, including ancient religious texts, popular folklore, and even older classical traditions that had been adapted for a Christian audience. A sculptor did not simply carve a man with a book. He carved Saint Jerome, and the book in his hands, along with the lion often seen sleeping peacefully beside him, told a story of scholarly translation and tamed wilderness. The lion itself was a multi-layered symbol. At the feet of a saint, it could represent courage or the power of faith over worldly dangers. In other contexts, particularly scenes of the resurrection, a lion whose cubs were said to be born dead and brought to life after 3 days by its roar became a powerful symbol for Christ rising from the tomb. This is how the cipher worked. It used the natural world as a mirror for spiritual truths. A scholar named Erwin Panofsky argued that to truly crack this code, you needed more than just an art history book. You had to understand the entire worldview of the person who commissioned the statue and the community that would view it. A bishop might order a sculpture of the Last Judgment for his cathedral entrance to emphasize his authority and the consequences of sin. A wealthy merchant's guild might fund a chapel adorned with statues of saints known for their honesty in trade. The art was never just decorative, it was persuasive. This intricate system allowed a single statue to hold multiple conversations at once. A peasant might see a simple, comforting story of faith and protection. A learned monk could read a deep theological argument in the very same stone. The sculptor's genius was in weaving these layers together into a cohesive whole, ensuring the message was both universally accessible and endlessly profound. So what were the most common words in this stone vocabulary? A lamb resting at the feet of a saint was never just a farm animal. It was a direct and powerful reference to the ultimate sacrifice, a symbol of innocence and a quiet proclamation of Christ's role as the Lamb of God. This was the deep, shared vocabulary of the Sculptors Cipher. Every creature, every plant, and every object was chosen with immense care, each one a well-understood word in this silent language. Medieval viewers recognized these symbols instantly, drawing from a common cultural well of bestiaries, biblical stories, and popular metaphors that were as familiar to them as street signs are to us. Where we might see a fearsome dragon, they saw the very embodiment of evil and chaos, a monstrous force being triumphantly crushed under the foot of a saint like Saint George or Saint Margaret. That single image was a complete sermon on the power of faith to overcome sin. Botanical choices were equally rich with meaning. A delicate lily held by the Virgin Mary was not merely a beautiful flower. It was a universal emblem of her purity and divine grace. The sturdy leaves of an oak tree, perhaps carved into the background of a prophet's statue, whispered of strength, endurance, and moral fortitude. These natural symbols reinforced the very virtues the statue was meant to embody, offering a visual lesson for all who passed by. Even color, though much of it has faded with time, was a critical layer of this communication. The application of precious gold leaf to a halo was not a simple decoration. It was a blazing sign of divinity, a way to make heavenly light physically manifest on earth. A figure draped in blue robes, a color made from costly lapis lazuli, was immediately understood to be blessed with heavenly grace or connected to the Virgin Mary. The stark, bold red of a martyr's garment told a story of passionate faith and the blood they shed for it, a biography woven into the very pigments. None of this was arbitrary or left to a sculptor's whim. These symbols formed a precise and efficient lexicon, a way to compress entire chapters of theological thought and complex saintly biographies into a single, powerful image. For a populace that could not read written words, these statues were their paragraphs and their pages. They were efficient, unforgettable teaching tools. By learning to recognize these patterns, we are not just appreciating old art. We are learning to read a forgotten dialect, one that allows the stone to finally speak its intended story. And the most eloquent part of this language was not found in objects, but in the human body itself. The most powerful words in this silent language were spoken by the body itself. A statue's pose and gestures were its voice, its inflection, its very tone. While a symbol like a lamb or a lily provided the noun, the gesture gave us the verb. It told us what the figure was doing and, more importantly, how they were feeling. A raised hand was not just a raised hand. When sculpted with the thumb and two fingers extended, it transformed into a specific gesture of blessing or teaching, a direct visual echo of a priest's benediction during Mass. The congregation would see that stone hand and instantly understand its sacred function, feeling the intended comfort or authority it projected. Conversely, crossed arms over the chest could signal a state of deep resignation, patient waiting, or solemn contemplation, a posture that invited the viewer into a moment of quiet reflection. This was body language elevated to a high art, every muscle and curve carved to convey a precise emotional and narrative state. Sculptors even borrowed an ancient technique to make their figures feel more alive. The contrapposto stance, where the figure's weight rests on one leg, creating a subtle S-curve in the body, was a trick inherited from classical Greek and Roman art. It made a stone saint appear to be caught in a moment of movement, suggesting they were actively present and engaged with the faithful standing before them. They were not frozen idols, but living participants in the drama of faith. Look at the gentle, cascading tilt of a Madonna's head as she gazes down at the Christ child. That single angle communicates an entire universe of maternal tenderness, protectiveness, and love. Now contrast that with a prophet like Jeremiah, carved with a rigid spine, his head held high and his eyes staring sternly forward. His unyielding posture is one of unwavering authority and dire warning, his body amplifying the gravity of his message without him ever needing to open his mouth. Art historians like Meir Shapiro spent careers mapping this visual grammar, showing how these gestures were standardized across Europe yet subtly adapted by local workshops. A blessing in France might have a slightly different elegance than one in Germany, each infused with a regional dialect of expression. To understand these nuances is to finally hear the emotional undertones in the cathedral's silence, to feel the whisper of intention through 7 centuries of stone. But a single statue was rarely meant to be seen alone. These stone figures were masterfully arranged into larger ensembles, where the very placement of each piece told a continuous story. This technique, known as narrative sequencing, allowed sculptors to depict entire sagas like the Passion of Christ or the life of a saint, not over time but across space. Walking up to a cathedral's main portal was like approaching a massive, 3-dimensional storybook. Your eyes would naturally travel from left to right, following a visual timeline carved in stone. You might begin with the Annunciation, where the angel Gabriel brings his message to Mary. Your gaze would then move to the Nativity, witnessing the humble birth in a manger, and finally arrive at the solemn power of the crucifixion. This was not a random collection of beautiful art. It was a meticulously planned visual journey designed to reinforce the liturgical lessons taught inside the church throughout the entire year. The sculptors employed brilliant visual cues to ensure the story was easy to follow, even for someone who had never heard a word of Latin. A figure in one scene might be gazing intently toward the next major event, physically guiding the viewer's eyes along the intended path. Overlapping figures or repeated architectural elements could create a sense of flow, seamlessly connecting one chapter to the next. Art experts emphasize that these groupings were orchestrated to highlight profound theological themes, like divine judgment or humanity's redemption. Each individual statue contributed a vital chapter to this overarching narrative, functioning much like the panels in a modern comic strip. By simply observing the sequence, a medieval audience could absorb complex doctrines intuitively. The sacred became accessible, tangible, and unforgettable. This organizational genius reveals how these artists used physical space itself as a powerful storytelling medium, transforming architecture into narrative. To truly hear these stories today, we need to learn how they were built, right down to the master's tools and marks. The chisel and the pixel now work in tandem to crack this ancient code. Modern scholars are unlocking the Sculptor's Cipher with a revolutionary toolkit that blends deep historical knowledge with 21st century technology. We are no longer limited to what the naked eye can see. High-resolution 3D scanning captures every minute detail of a statue's surface, from the faintest fold in a robe to the most delicate carving on a tiny symbol. This digital model can then be manipulated, allowing researchers to study a sculpture from every conceivable angle without ever touching the fragile original. They can even simulate how light would have fallen across the figure at different times of day within a cathedral, revealing how the artist used shadow and illumination as part of their visual sermon. Perhaps the most dramatic revelation comes from multispectral imaging. This advanced photographic technique uses light wavelengths beyond human vision to peer through centuries of dirt, soot, and overpainting. It can detect the ghostly traces of original pigments that are completely invisible to us now. With this data, experts can create scientifically informed reconstructions, showing us how a brilliantly painted statue of a saint would have looked to a medieval worshipper. Imagine a golden halo that actually shimmered in the candlelight, or a blood-red martyr's cloak that told its story in vibrant color. This technology shatters the myth of the pure white marble past, returning these figures to their original polychrome life. 3D printing offers another tactile dimension to this research. Scholars can produce accurate replicas of a statue's hands or face, allowing them to physically feel the subtle wear patterns left by centuries of devoted touch. The smooth, polished spot on a foot or a knee indicates where generations of pilgrims reached out, a powerful data point mapping popular devotion and interaction. This physical evidence tells us which saints were most often prayed to, and which parts of their stories resonated most deeply with the common people. But technology alone is not enough. The cipher is also cracked through comparative analysis, connecting the statues to other medieval art forms. Experts meticulously cross-reference the symbols and gestures found in sculpture with those in illuminated manuscripts, stained glass, and even tapestries. Many sculptors drew direct inspiration from widely circulated picture books like the Biblia Pauperum or Popper's Bible. This was a visual concordance of scripture, using side-by-side images from the Old and New Testaments to explain complex theological ideas. If a particular symbolic motif appears in both a famous manuscript and on a cathedral facade, it confirms that the symbol was part of a shared, understood vocabulary. Even the very stone itself can be made to speak. Scientific techniques like dendrochronology, which dates wood by analyzing tree ring patterns, can help date wooden sculptures with incredible precision. Analyzing the geological source of the stone used for a statue can trace the routes it traveled from quarry to workshop, mapping the spread of artistic ideas along trade routes and through monastic networks. This interdisciplinary detective work, combining chemistry, physics, history, and theology, is transforming silent stone monuments into dynamic historical documents. We are not just preserving old art, we are reviving a conversation that has been paused for 700 years, finally giving us the tools to listen and understand the full story. And with every statue we decode, a clearer picture of the medieval mind begins to emerge. The smiling angel of Reims does not simply smile. It offers a serene, knowing expression that has captivated viewers for centuries, a masterclass in the Sculptor's Cipher where emotion itself becomes a symbol. Carved in the 13th century, This angel embodies a profound shift in medieval art, moving from stern representations of divinity towards something more approachable and human. Its gently inclined head and soft gaze feel like a direct personal offer of comfort, a deliberate message of hope and divine benevolence crafted during one of Europe's most turbulent eras. The 100 Years' War raged and the shadow of the plague fell across the land. In such a time of widespread fear and suffering, this angel's smile was a radical statement. It was a stone-carved promise that grace and peace were still possible, a visual antidote to the despair of the age. Positioned within the cathedral's north portal, the angel is not an isolated figure. It forms part of a larger sculptural group depicting the visitation, a biblical story about a joyful announcement. This context is crucial. The angel is a messenger, and its smile is the content of its message. The flowing, graceful lines of its robes and the calm, balanced posture are not merely aesthetic choices. They are visual synonyms for harmony, order, and celestial grace, reinforcing the optimistic news it seems to be delivering. This was a calculated composition designed to guide a weary populace toward a feeling of solace and spiritual reassurance the moment they approached the church doors. Yet, some art historians suggest this famous smile might hold a more complex, even subversive, layer of meaning. The late Middle Ages saw the gradual emergence of humanistic thought, an increasing focus on human emotion and experience. The angel's distinctly human expression could be a subtle nod to this evolving worldview, a quiet emphasis on personal connection with the divine that existed alongside, and perhaps even challenged, the more formal and authoritarian structures of the church. It demonstrates the incredible power of this visual language. A single, expertly carved expression could simultaneously comfort the masses, convey deep theological ideas, and quietly reflect the changing intellectual currents of its time. This statue proves that the most powerful symbols are not always objects or gestures, but the emotions they are crafted to evoke, a testament to the sculptor's ability to encode an entire worldview in a curve of the lips. This emotional power, however, was often directed by the very people who paid for the stone and the artist's time. A bishop did not simply order a statue. He commissioned a sermon in stone with a very specific audience and message in mind. The silent language of the Sculptors Cipher was not just an artistic choice, it was often a direct delivery system for the agenda of the powerful patron who paid for it. These patrons, whether they were high-ranking church officials, wealthy nobles, or influential merchant guilds, used art as a tool for persuasion, commemoration, and social control. They understood that a compelling visual narrative could shape public opinion and reinforce their authority far more effectively than a decree that few could read. The sculptor, for all their genius, was working within a framework designed by their client, embedding specific symbols that served a patron's goals. A wealthy merchant's guild funding a new chapel, for example, would often insist their patron saint be shown not just with a traditional attribute, but with the tools of their own trade. A statue of Saint Nicholas, the patron of merchants, might be carved holding a set of finely detailed scales or with a miniature ship at his feet. This was not subtle. It was a public declaration of the guild's economic power, piety, and social importance, all woven seamlessly into the fabric of the church itself. Royal patrons were even more direct in their messaging. A king commissioning his own effigy for a tomb would be depicted not as a mere mortal, but in the idealized guise of a biblical king like Solomon, known for his wisdom, or David, celebrated for his courage and faith. This imagery served a vital political purpose, visually arguing for the divine right of kings and connecting their earthly rule to heavenly mandate. It was propaganda carved in the most durable material available. The church itself was perhaps the most influential patron of all. Bishops and abbots frequently dictated entire iconographic programs to combat rising heresies or to encourage specific forms of piety among the faithful. This is why we see certain symbolic motifs repeated with such insistence. A saint trampling a serpent or a dragon underfoot was not just a general symbol of good defeating evil. In a region where a particular heretical sect was active, that crushed serpent became a very specific symbol of the church's power to defeat its enemies. The art was a weapon in a theological war, and every symbol was chosen for maximum impact. This intricate patronage system means that to truly crack the cipher on any statue, we must ask two questions: who paid for this, and what did they want people to believe? The answer reveals that these stone saints were never neutral. They were active participants in the social and political struggles of their time, their silent gestures speaking volumes about power, money, and faith. This dance between the artist's hand and the patron's purse also meant the cipher's dialect changed dramatically from one place to another. A lion carved in France did not always mean the same thing as a lion carved in Germany. The Sculptors Cipher had distinct regional dialects shaped by the stone itself, local folklore, and the invisible paths of trade. A master sculptor in Burgundy worked with a different kind of limestone than a carver in Tuscany, and the very grain of the rock influenced the fineness of detail and the flow of the drapery. These were not minor stylistic choices. They were fundamental to how the message was formed and understood. In the great Gothic cathedrals of northern France, like Chartres and Amiens, the stone saints seem to be in constant motion. Their robes cascade in deep, rhythmic folds, their bodies curve into elegant S shapes, and their faces often hold a serene, otherworldly expression. This French style prioritized a graceful, emotional narrative, making the sacred stories feel dynamic and alive to the viewer standing below. The goal was to inspire awe through beauty and movement. Cross the Alps into Italy, and the visual accent changes completely. Here, sculptors were surrounded by the physical ruins of ancient Rome. Their work often reflects a rediscovery of classical ideals, with figures standing in calm, balanced poses, their proportions more natural and grounded. An Italian saint might hold an oak wreath, a direct borrow from Roman symbols of victory and civic virtue, repurposed to signify a spiritual triumph. The communication was often more intellectual, a quiet dialogue with a grander artistic past. In England, the cipher took on a more intricate and decorative tone. Statues frequently feature wonderfully complex drapery patterns and are surrounded by elaborate foliate designs, patterns that harken back to the interlacing beasts and vines of Anglo-Saxon metalwork and manuscripts. This love of surface detail created a rich, textured visual field where the eye could wander and discover new symbols nestled within the carving. Meanwhile, in German lands, the approach was often one of raw, emotional intensity. Figures could be dramatically elongated, their faces etched with deep lines of spiritual anguish or ecstatic fervor. The goal was not calm beauty but a powerful, visceral impact to make the viewer feel the saint's suffering or divine joy in their own bones. This is why context is everything for a modern decoder. That lion resting at the feet of a saint in a French cathedral, it might broadly symbolize the strength of faith or the power of a king who funded the building. But in a German church, the same lion, especially if depicted next to a tomb, might be specifically invoking the legend of its cubs being brought to life after 3 days, making it a clear and local symbol of Christ's resurrection. These regional accents reveal a medieval Europe that was far from a monolith. It was a tapestry of distinct cultural identities, each weaving its own history and values into the universal language of faith. The cipher was not a rigid codex, but a living language that adapted to the place and the people who used it, proving that stone could speak in many different voices. And those voices were in constant conversation with the other arts that filled the medieval world. Even the stone saints were never truly alone. They were the central figures in a grand visual orchestra, where every element of a medieval church worked in concert to immerse the faithful in a complete sensory experience. The Sculptor's Cipher was just one powerful voice in a much larger chorus that included the radiant glow of stained glass and the sweeping narratives of frescoes. Together, they transformed a sacred space into a three-dimensional storybook that one could literally walk through, a total work of art designed to engage the eyes, the mind, and the soul all at once. Stained glass windows served as the perfect complement to stone carvings, often expanding on the same story in a different medium. A dramatic statue of St. George triumphantly standing over a slain dragon might be paired with a magnificent window nearby that depicted the grueling details of his martyrdom. The statue captured the timeless ideal of virtue overcoming evil, while the glass narrated the cost of that victory, the two artworks reinforcing each other to present a fuller, more powerful portrait of sainthood. The vibrant, jewel-toned light streaming through these windows did more than just tell a story. It bathed the stone statues below in a constantly shifting, ethereal glow, making them appear to be living, breathing participants in the celestial drama. The color itself was a form of communication, with the deep blue of a Marian window connecting visually to the lapis lazuli pigment on a statue of the Virgin below, creating a harmonious visual link that the congregation would feel even if they could not articulate it. Meanwhile, frescoes painted across vast walls and ceilings provided the essential context, the theological fine print to the sculptural headlines. A complex sculptural scene of the Last Judgment above a church door could be daunting. But a fresco on an adjacent wall might illustrate the harrowing of hell or the joys of paradise, acting as a detailed caption that helped viewers unpack the symbolic meaning of the stone figures. These paintings could guide the eye through complex doctrinal points, making abstract concepts like redemption or divine mercy feel immediate and real. This was a holistic approach to teaching, a multimedia strategy long before the term existed. A peasant entering the church would not see separate works of art. They would experience a single, overwhelming environment where every element, from the floor they walked on to the vaults high above, worked together to tell one unified story of faith. Scholars sometimes call this integrated environment a symphony of symbols, a place where the visual, the spatial, and the spiritual merged into one. To understand this interplay is to finally grasp the genius of medieval communication. It was not about seeing one statue or one window. It was about feeling the cumulative effect of all of them at once, about being surrounded by a world where every color, every gesture, and every symbol pointed toward a greater truth. This collaborative artistry reveals a level of sophistication that we are only now beginning to fully appreciate, and it all started with the raw material in the sculptor's hands. The stone itself was the sculptor's first and most important collaborator. A block of soft, fine-grained limestone from a quarry in France was not the same as a slab of hard, veined marble from Italy. Each material had its own personality, its own strengths, and its own voice, and the master sculptor knew how to listen. The choice of stone was the first step in encoding the message, a decision that shaped everything from the emotional expression to the very longevity of the statue. Soft limestone was the perfect canvas for intricate storytelling. Its yielding nature allowed a sculptor's chisel to carve the most delicate details, from the gentle wrinkles at the corner of an eye that suggested wisdom to the impossibly fine strands of hair escaping a saint's hood. This was the stone of subtle expression, capable of holding a whisper. In contrast, marble demanded respect and immense effort. Its hardness and crystalline structure meant it could be polished to a high, gleaming finish, making it the ideal medium for figures meant to embody permanence and divine radiance. A marble saint would catch the light in a specific way, almost seeming to glow from within, a clear signal of their heavenly nature. Softer sandstones, often used in regions without local limestone quarries, offered a more rustic and textured feel, perfectly suited for depicting rugged prophets or earthy apostles, their rough-hewn surfaces echoing the hardships of their lives. But choosing the stone was only the beginning. The sculptor then employed a toolbox of physical techniques to make the stone speak. One of the most dramatic was undercutting. This was a daring and risky process of carving deep beneath the surface of the stone to create areas of shadow. By undercutting the drapery of a robe, a sculptor could make the cloth appear to flutter in an unseen breeze. By carving deep beneath a raised arm, they created a pool of shadow that made the limbs seem to lift away from the body, frozen in mid-gesture. This play of light and shadow was not an accident. It was a calculated technique to inject a sense of movement and breath into an inert object, making the figure feel present and alive in the space with the viewer. Then came the color. Though we mostly see them as bare stone today, these statues were originally vibrant with polychromy. They were painted from head to toe with pigments derived from precious minerals and plants. This was the final, crucial layer of the cipher. A golden halo was not just painted yellow, it was layered with actual gold leaf to shimmer in the candlelight. The Virgin Mary's cloak was not just blue, it was painted with ultramarine, a pigment more valuable than gold, made from crushed lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan. This extravagant use of color was a direct and unmistakable symbol of her supreme importance. The red of a martyr's blood, the green of eternal life, the white of purity, each hue was a word in this visual sentence. Even the marks left by the tools were part of the language. A sculptor might leave certain areas intentionally rough, using a toothed chisel to create a textured surface that suggested the coarse wool of a hermit's garment or the unkempt hair of John the Baptist. Conversely, the skin of a holy figure would be smoothed and polished with abrasives until it was almost soft to the touch, a tactile representation of their spiritual refinement. If you look closely at some statues, you can still see the precise round holes left by a drill bit, used to create the deep pupils of eyes that once held glass inserts, making the gaze startlingly real. Every one of these technical choices was a deliberate act of communication. The material, the shadow, the color, and the texture all worked in concert to tell the story. To decode the cipher, we must learn to see not just the saint, but the artist's hand in every chip and curve, and to hear the voice they carved into the very grain of the stone. A dog was never just a dog. It was a living emblem of unwavering loyalty, a faithful companion carved in stone to remind the viewer of a saint's own devotion or the steadfastness of their faith. The animal kingdom provided the medieval sculptor with a rich and universally understood symbolic vocabulary, a visual shorthand drawn from popular bestiaries and folklore that allowed a single creature to convey an entire concept. These beasts, both real and mythical, were not decorative afterthoughts. They were essential narrative devices, the supporting cast that gave deeper meaning to the saintly lead. The majestic griffin, with the powerful body of a lion and the keen eyes and wings of an eagle, was a formidable hybrid. It stood as a fierce guardian of the divine, its very form a symbol of the dual nature of Christ, both fully human and fully divine, and its watchful presence on cathedral roofs or near tombs signaled a sacred, protected space. In direct contrast, the elusive unicorn represented a different kind of power, the power of purity. According to popular legend, this wild and untamable beast could only be captured by a virgin, in whose lap it would willingly lay its head. This made it a perfect allegory for the incarnation of Christ, who was drawn to the purity of the Virgin Mary. The animal's horn was also believed to have the power to purify water, adding another layer of meaning as a symbol of cleansing from sin. Even common creatures carried profound weight. A patient ox at the nativity scene spoke of strength and sacrifice, while a pelican, believed to pierce its own breast to feed its young with its blood, became a startlingly direct symbol of Christ's crucifixion and the redemption it offered. But this symbolic language was not reserved for positive virtues alone. The medieval worldview was a constant struggle between good and evil, and sculptures gave tangible form to these abstract dangers. The sinister basilisk, a serpent with the head of a rooster, was the king of serpents whose mere gaze could cause death. It was the embodiment of pure evil and heresy, a monstrous force that only the most powerful faith could overcome. Similarly, dragons and serpents writhed under the feet of triumphant saints like Saint George and Saint Margaret, their defeat a clear and comforting visual promise that evil would ultimately be conquered. To see a statue of Saint Roch without his faithful dog bringing him bread would be to miss a crucial chapter of his story. That simple animal represents the divine providence that sustained the saint during his plague-induced isolation, transforming the sculpture from a mere portrait into a complete narrative of suffering, faith, and deliverance. Every creature, from the noble to the nightmarish, was a carefully chosen word in the sculptor's sermon, a thread woven into a larger tapestry of meaning that even the simplest parishioner could read and understand. A saint holding a wheel was never just a strange accessory. It was the immediate and horrifying signature of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, a brutal shorthand for the torture wheel that shattered at her touch. This was the human heart of the Sculptor's Cipher, where every figure was meticulously designed as an archetype, a walking lesson in virtue, vice, or the possibility of redemption that lay between. The saints were the ultimate role models, their bodies and their attributes forming a visual resume of their faith and sacrifice. Saint Bartholomew, often shown holding his own flayed skin or the knife that removed it, presented a stark image of endurance. Saint Lawrence calmly held the iron grill upon which he was martyred, a symbol of unwavering faith even in the face of agonizing death. These were not meant to be frightening. They were empowering, reminding every viewer that the strength to endure unimaginable trials could be found through devotion. The saints' faces were often serene, their postures graceful, turning a story of brutal martyrdom into a testament of transcendent peace. They were the ideal to strive for, their very presence in stone a promise that such spiritual fortitude was attainable. But for every model of virtue, there was a cautionary tale carved in grotesque form. High up on the cathedral roof, gargoyles and other distorted figures leered down at the populace. These were the embodiments of sin, their twisted features and monstrous appearances serving as a constant, silent sermon on the perils of vice. In the terrifying tableau of a Last Judgment scene, the damned souls were often sculpted with their bodies contorted in agony, being dragged down to hell by demons. Their expressions were frozen in eternal despair, a powerful visual deterrent against a life of immorality. This stark contrast was intentional. The beautiful, calm saint stood near the tormented, ugly sinner, creating a clear binary choice for the viewer, a simple and unforgettable map of the spiritual consequences of one's actions. Yet the story was not only about distant saints and abstract sinners. Sculptors also carved figures of ordinary people, the everyman of their time. A wealthy donor might be immortalized in a small kneeling statue, peering up at the larger-than-life saint he funded, his humble posture a public display of piety. Scenes of the harvest or daily labor sometimes included peasant figures, their relatable faces and postures making the sacred stories feel grounded in the real world. These inclusions were profoundly important. They sent a message that holiness was not reserved for the celestial elite or the clergy alone, but was a path open to the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. It fostered a sense of identification, reminding the common person that they too had a stake in this spiritual drama. Through this careful balancing act of ideal saints, horrifying sinners, and relatable common folk, the medieval sculptor did more than decorate. They provided a complete moral education, reinforcing social and religious structures while simultaneously offering hope and guidance to every soul who passed beneath their gaze. The true genius was in making these stone figures feel, and that required mastering the most subtle language of all. A slight upturn of carved lips could speak volumes of divine compassion, while the subtle furrow of a stone brow conveyed a depth of sorrow more profound than any written lament. The true miracle of the sculptor's cipher was its ability to make granite and marble feel, to breathe human emotion into the most unyielding of materials. This was not achieved through grand, theatrical gestures, but through an exquisite and deliberate attention to the smallest of details. The key was in the eyes. By carving the pupils as shallow, upturned crescents, a sculptor could give a saint the appearance of gazing heavenward in rapturous awe, completely lost in a vision of the divine. In contrast, a downcast gaze, with eyelids heavy and slightly closed, instantly communicated a state of deep contemplation, inner sorrow, or pious resignation. The set of the mouth was equally telling. A gentle, closed smile, like the one gracing the angel of Reims, did not signify mere happiness. It was a complex symbol of serene knowledge, heavenly grace, and a quiet, comforting assurance offered to the faithful. Even the tilt of a head became a powerful emotional lever. A figure leaning slightly forward toward the viewer created an intimate sense of engagement, as if the saint was personally listening to a whispered prayer. Conversely, a head drawn back and lifted high could project authority, divine revelation, or a focus on a celestial world beyond our own, but the emotion did not stop at the face. The entire body told the story. The heavy, cascading folds of a robe were not just a display of technical skill. When carved to appear as if blown by a strong, unseen wind, they created a powerful sense of dynamism and spiritual urgency, making the figure seem caught in a moment of profound action or revelation. A hand clutched to the chest physically manifested heartache or devotion, while arms held open wide became an eternal gesture of welcome and embrace. This emotional vocabulary was carefully standardized across workshops so that an expression of grief in England would be understood as grief in France. Yet within that framework, master carvers imbued their figures with a breathtaking individuality, a faint, unique personality that made each saint or angel feel like a distinct presence. This was the ultimate purpose. In an age of immense hardship, plague, and war, these emotionally resonant figures provided a constant source of spiritual solace. A grieving mother could look upon a sorrowful Mary and feel seen in her pain. A troubled soul could find comfort in the compassionate smile of an angel. The stone did not judge. It offered silent, steady companionship, a focal point for meditation and a mirror for the human heart. To stand before such a work was to engage in a quiet conversation across 7 centuries, one where the first thing communicated was not a story or a symbol, but a feeling. And that feeling was the key that unlocked everything else. The stories carved in stone were first written on parchment. The sculptor's cipher drew its deepest power from a rich literary tradition, translating complex written narratives into a universal visual language that anyone could understand. Biblical passages, the dramatic lives of saints, and popular allegorical poems provided the raw material, the source code, for the symbols artists would chisel into being. This created a continuous dialogue between the word and the image, where each medium reinforced and enriched the other. A literate monk could look at a complex scene and recall the exact verse from the book of Revelation that inspired it, while a farmer who had never held a Bible would recognize the same story from sermons and festival plays. The art was a bridge, making the profound accessible to all. Consider the immense influence of a work like Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, written in the early 1300s. Its vivid, terrifying descriptions of the circles of hell, with their specific punishments for specific sins, provided sculptors with a powerful new visual roadmap for depicting divine judgment. Suddenly, scenes above church doors began to show more intricate and layered visions of the damned, their torments reflecting Dante's poetic imagination. Similarly, his luminous descriptions of paradise, structured into concentric spheres of light and joy, influenced how artists depicted the heavenly host, moving beyond simple rows of saints to more dynamic visions of celestial harmony. This was not simple illustration, it was a profound collaboration across artistic mediums. For the animal symbols that populate so many statues, sculptors turned to bestiaries. These were popular books like the Physiologus, which described both real and mythical creatures and assigned each a moral or spiritual meaning. The sculptor did not invent the idea of the pelican piercing its own breast to feed its young with its blood. They read that powerful allegory in a bestiary, where it was explicitly presented as a symbol for Christ's sacrifice on the cross, and they then chose to carve it as a visual shorthand for that entire concept of redemption. The self-sacrificing pelican, the loyal dog, the pure unicorn, all of these entered the stone vocabulary directly from these influential texts. Even secular literature left its mark. The courtly romances and chivalric tales that entertained nobility also inspired sculptures in castles and manor houses. A knight might be depicted with a loyal hound at his feet, an attribute drawn from stories of unwavering fidelity, or shown in a posture of courtly love, blending the themes of sacred devotion and earthly passion. This interweaving of sacred and profane sources shows the cipher was a living, adaptable language, constantly absorbing new stories and ideas from the culture around it. This deep literary connection meant the statues could speak on multiple levels simultaneously. An educated patron could look at a portal and enjoy a sophisticated visual pun or a subtle reference to a recently copied manuscript, appreciating the intellectual depth of the program. Meanwhile, the illiterate majority, raised on the same core stories through oral tradition, would receive the essential message of faith, warning, or comfort. The genius of the system was its inclusivity. Everyone could read the page, even if they decoded it to different depths. To recognize these literary roots is to add a crucial layer to our decoding efforts, hearing the echo of lost manuscripts in the silence of the stone. This language, however, was never meant to stay the same. This silent language of stone was never frozen in time. As the 14th century unfolded, the sculptor's cipher evolved, its vocabulary shifting to reflect a world shaken by profound change. The early decades saw statues carved with a formal, almost otherworldly grace, their poses hieratic and their symbolic attributes clear and doctrinal. A saint from this period was less an individual and more an ideal, a perfect vessel for a specific theological truth. Their purpose was to inspire awe and reinforce a structured, celestial order. But a new wind was beginning to blow, one that carried the whispers of humanism and a growing curiosity about the individual human experience. Gothic architects were achieving new heights of lightness and space, and sculptors followed suit, beginning to experiment with more naturalistic drapery and subtly relaxed postures. The rigid conventions started to soften, making room for a flicker of personal expression. Then the world broke. The Black Death swept across Europe, leaving behind a landscape of unimaginable grief and trauma. In the shadow of such overwhelming mortality, the cipher adapted once more. The art that emerged from the plague years carried a stark, new urgency. Memento mori imagery, reminders of death, surged into the visual vocabulary. Skulls began to appear at the feet of saints and donors alike. Hourglasses were carved into tomb effigies, and the grim figure of death itself became a more frequent visitor in sculpted scenes. This was not mere morbidity, it was a profound cultural response to collective loss, a stark visual sermon on the fragility of all earthly life. Yet, alongside this grim honesty came a powerful counterpoint, a surge of compassionate realism. Saints were increasingly depicted not as distant, perfect beings, but as empathetic comforters who understood human suffering. The Virgin Mary's sorrow was rendered with a deeper, more human grief. A saint might be shown tenderly comforting a victim of the plague, their stone face etched with a palpable sense of shared sorrow. The emotional range of the cipher had expanded dramatically, now capable of holding both the terror of death and the solace of compassion within the same carved space. This evolution makes the statues themselves historical documents. By tracking the introduction of these new symbols and the gradual softening of forms, art historians can often pinpoint when a piece was carved, using the changing cipher as a precise dating tool. More importantly, it allows us to witness how medieval people processed unimaginable crises through the art they created, seeking meaning and comfort in the silent language of their churches. The century closed with the cipher richer and more nuanced than ever, a complex blend of doctrine, death, and humanity that set the stage perfectly for the artistic explosion of the Renaissance. These stone speakers were not isolated in silent galleries. They were active participants in the bustling life of the community. These stone figures were not meant for quiet contemplation in a museum. They were active participants in the bustling life of the medieval town, touched, spoken to, and treated with a reverence that left physical marks on their surfaces. The most telling evidence of this deep engagement is found in the wear patterns. The feet of certain saints are often polished smooth, worn down by centuries of devoted lips offering kisses of supplication or gratitude. The knee of a compassionate Madonna might be shiny from the touch of countless hands seeking comfort, the stone itself softened by the weight of human hope. These are not signs of damage, but a powerful data set of popular devotion, a map of where people physically connected with the divine. Pilgrims on long, arduous journeys would seek out specific saints known for their healing powers, believing that touching the attribute associated with their miracle could transfer a fraction of that blessing. They might gently rub the miniature tower held by Saint Barbara, the patroness against sudden death, or touch the stone eyes of Saint Lucy, pleading for protection against blindness. This was a tangible, physical faith, where the boundary between the statue and the saint it represented was beautifully and intentionally blurred. Communities gathered around these figures for annual festivals, processing them through the streets draped in real cloth and adorned with fresh flowers, treating them as honored guests and powerful protectors. Records from church accounts detail expenses for clothing these statues, for crafting tiny silver crowns or jeweled swords to place in their hands. They were not inanimate art, they were mediators, active conduits between the earthly and the heavenly. This intense interactivity placed a unique demand on the Sculptors Cipher. The symbolism had to be instantly legible to a weary pilgrim who had traveled for weeks, requiring a universally understood visual shorthand. Yet, for the local parishioner who saw the statue every day, the same carving had to hold deeper layers of meaning, offering new insights upon repeated contemplative viewings. This delicate balance between immediate accessibility and enduring depth is the hallmark of the cipher's genius. To understand these works, we must see them not as silent relics, but as the well-worn centerpieces of a vibrant, living community, their stone surfaces warmed by the breath of prayers and the touch of hands. This very intimacy, however, is what makes them so vulnerable to the passage of time. Gazing at a medieval statue today, we are not seeing the original message, but a faded and fragmented whisper. Centuries of exposure have taken a heavy toll on these stone storytellers. The gentle curve of a blessing hand may have been worn smooth by wind and rain, blurring its sacred gesture. A once crisp symbol, like the tiny lion at a saint's feet, might be eroded into an ambiguous shape, its meaning lost to weathering. Industrial pollution and acid rain have acted like a slow-acting solvent, dissolving the finest details of facial expressions and the delicate folds of robes that were so crucial to the emotional language of the cipher. This natural decay is only part of the story. Human hands have often caused the most direct damage. Iconoclastic movements during periods of religious upheaval led to the deliberate defacement of statues, with heads and hands struck off to silence their perceived idolatry. Even well-intentioned efforts have caused harm. Restorers in the 18th and 19th centuries, working without modern tools or a deep understanding of medieval symbolism, often recarved features based on their own artistic tastes or mistaken assumptions. A serene, knowing smile might have been reshaped into a generic blank stare, or a specific, symbolic attribute might have been replaced with something they found more decorative, effectively rewriting the stone sentence without knowing the original language. The most profound loss is one we can barely perceive today: the complete absence of original color. The vibrant polychromy that once covered every statue was a fundamental layer of the code. We miss the heavenly blue of a Virgin Mary's robe, a color so expensive it shouted her importance. We miss the blood red of a martyr's cloak that visually preached their sacrifice. Without these clear color cues, we are trying to read a book where all the highlighted words have been erased. Structural changes to the buildings themselves have created another puzzle. Statues were often moved from their original locations, perhaps from a doorway to a dim interior chapel. This divorces them from their intended narrative context. A prophet carved to gaze toward a sculpted scene of the Last Judgment loses his purpose if he is turned to face a blank wall. His silent warning goes unheard because his visual connection to the story has been severed. Modern conservators are now the guardians of these faded messages. They use non-invasive techniques like gentle laser cleaning to remove harmful crusts without touching the original stone beneath. Their work is a painstaking form of detective work, a race against time to stabilize these fragile witnesses to history and recover whatever whispers they have left for us. Every chip of stone, every trace of pigment is a clue in the great effort to hear them speak again. A digital twin now holds the secrets the naked eye could never see. High-resolution 3D scanners capture a statue with such precision that they record every individual chisel mark left by the medieval master's hand. This is not a simple photograph, it is a perfect, manipulable replica existing in a digital space. Researchers can zoom into a microscopic level to study the specific tools used, the direction of the cuts, and even the subtle wear patterns left by centuries of touch, all without risking damage to the fragile original. They can then simulate the statue's original placement within a cathedral, tracking how sunlight from a stained glass window would have illuminated a specific symbol at noon, or how flickering candlelight would have made a compassionate expression seem to soften at vespers. This allows us to understand how the sculptor used light itself as a component of their silent sermon, a layer of meaning completely lost when a statue is placed under the flat, even lighting of a modern museum. Beyond shape, we are now recovering color. Hyperspectral imaging uses light wavelengths far beyond what our eyes can perceive to act like a time machine for paint. It can detect the faintest chemical traces of pigments that have been completely invisible for hundreds of years. A plain stone fold of robe might be revealed to have once been a brilliant, costly red. A smooth halo might still hold the spectral ghost of its original gold leaf. With this data, experts can create scientifically accurate digital reconstructions, showing us the statue not as a ghostly white monument, but as the vibrant, polychrome figure it was always meant to be. This technology shatters the myth of a monochrome medieval world, returning these figures to their original communicative brilliance. The analysis does not stop with a single statue. Artificial intelligence algorithms are being trained to analyze thousands of images of medieval sculpture, comparing subtle details of drapery style, facial features, and symbolic motifs across continents. This allows scholars to identify the distinct hand of a specific workshop, tracing the journey of a master carver from one cathedral project to the next. It can also spot regional patterns we might miss, confirming that a particular way of carving an oak leaf was unique to a specific valley in Germany, helping us map the intricate dialects of the cipher with unprecedented accuracy. Finally, virtual reality headsets can transport us back in time, allowing us to stand in a digitally reconstructed cathedral and see the statues arranged in their original narrative sequences. We can witness how a prophet's stern gaze was meant to lead our eyes directly to a scene of the Last Judgment, or how a gentle angel's smile was positioned to be the first thing a pilgrim saw after a long journey. This restores the crucial context that has been lost through centuries of rebuilding, moving, and restoration. We are no longer just looking at isolated artifacts. We are experiencing the total immersive environment for which they were created. This is not technology for its own sake. It is the key to a much richer, more vibrant conversation with the artists of the past, allowing us to hear their intended messages with a clarity we have not had for 700 years. A medieval guild ledger is a map to a master's mind. Cracking the Sculptor's Cipher is a detective story that demands two very different toolkits, one filled with ancient manuscripts and a sharp eye, the other with spectral images and powerful algorithms. Traditional art history provides the essential context, the cultural dictionary we need to begin translating. Scholars spend years poring over dusty church records, theological treatises, and guild account books. These documents can tell us who paid for a statue, how much they paid, and sometimes even the name of the carver. This is how we move from an anonymous block of stone to a work with a specific patron, a probable date, and a place in a known artistic tradition. Stylistic analysis is another cornerstone of this older method. An expert eye can recognize the distinct way a particular workshop carved the folds of a robe or the curl of a beard, much like you might recognize a friend's handwriting. This allows historians to attribute unsigned works to a specific master or regional school, tracing the spread of artistic ideas across the map of Europe. These traditional skills are about deep, immersive knowledge, about understanding the world that gave birth to the art. But the modern toolkit brings something entirely new to the investigation: objectivity. Scientific techniques like material analysis can identify the exact quarry a block of limestone came from, tracing its journey to the workshop. Dendrochronology applied to the wooden cores of some sculptures can provide a near-exact year of creation by matching the tree ring patterns to known climatic sequences. Radiocarbon dating, while less precise for this period, can still offer a broad time frame. This hard data acts as a crucial check on the more subjective judgments of stylistic analysis. It can confirm an attribution or, just as importantly, shatter a long-held assumption, forcing scholars to look at a familiar piece with fresh eyes. The real power, however, lies not in choosing one method over the other, but in weaving them together into a single, stronger thread of inquiry. A high-resolution 3D scan might reveal a symbol that was worn away to the naked eye, perhaps a tiny, hidden pomegranate carved on the base of a statue. Technology finds the clue, but it is the scholar steeped in medieval symbolism who recognizes that pomegranate as a well-known emblem of Christ's resurrection and the unity of the Church. The machine provides the evidence, the human provides the meaning. This is the new golden age of art historical discovery, a collaborative dance between the library and the laboratory. By marrying the nuanced interpretation of the scholar with the precise data of the scientist, we achieve readings of these statues that are both astonishingly accurate and richly layered with cultural understanding. We are no longer just guessing at what a gesture might mean. We are building a case for it, combining the wisdom of the past with the tools of the present to finally hear every word of the stone's silent sermon. Yet every interpretation is a form of translation, and every translator must face the difficult question of their own bias. Decoding the Sculptor's Cipher is not a neutral scientific process. It is an act of cultural conversation across 7 centuries, and that conversation carries profound ethical weight. The symbols we see are filtered through our own modern lens, and the greatest danger is in assuming our lens is clear. Take, for example, a statue of a medieval woman with downcast eyes and hands folded in prayer. A contemporary viewer might easily interpret this as a representation of passivity or submission, but to impose that modern value judgment is to completely miss the cipher's intended meaning. In its original context, that posture was a powerful, active symbol of deep piety and spiritual focus, a virtue celebrated and aspired to by all members of society, men and women alike. This kind of misreading doesn't just get the past wrong, it disrespects it, stripping away the period's own complex framework of meaning and replacing it with our own assumptions. The ethical responsibility deepens when these interpretations are weaponized for modern agendas. A nationalist movement might exaggerate certain regional stylistic traits to construct a purified, exclusive artistic heritage that never truly existed. A tourism board might simplify a complex theological symbol into a catchy, marketable legend for souvenirs, flattening its profound spiritual significance into a trivial story. These acts are a form of historical appropriation, bending the silent voices of the past to serve a present-day purpose they never would have recognized or endorsed. This is why scholars today emphasize a stance of humility. It means openly acknowledging the vast gaps in our knowledge and actively consulting a wider range of sources. It involves seeking out the marginalized perspectives that traditional art history has often overlooked, asking what these statues might have meant not just to the bishops and nobles who commissioned them, but to the everyday women, the common laborers, and the poor who also lived with them. This ethical framework extends from interpretation into physical conservation. The choice to clean a statue, to repair a broken hand, or to reintegrate a lost piece is never merely technical. There is a constant tension between preserving the authentic, weathered artifact and enhancing its visual appeal for modern audiences. The ethical path prioritizes stabilization and truthful documentation over cosmetic restoration, ensuring that the marks of time and use are not erased. This allows future generations to engage with the genuine object with all its scars and stories, rather than a polished replica of what we think it should have been. The goal is not to hear our own echo in the stone, but to listen carefully for its original, distant voice. The principles of the Sculptor's Cipher did not fade with the Gothic age, they simply found new mediums. We are surrounded by their direct descendants every time we look at a screen. The icons on our phones and the emojis in our texts are the modern world's answer to the medieval symbol, a universal visual language designed for instant comprehension across cultures and languages. A thumbs-up emoji conveys approval as clearly as St. Peter's keys denoted authority, and a heart symbol communicates love with the same efficiency as the Virgin Mary's gentle gaze. This is not a coincidence, it is the same human drive for efficient, nonverbal communication, repurposed for the digital town square. Graphic designers and user experience experts are the new guild masters, carefully crafting symbols that must be understood intuitively, without a written manual, exactly as a medieval mason carved a lamb to signify sacrifice. The field of semiotics, the study of signs and symbols, provides the academic framework for this, but its roots are planted firmly in the soil of the 14th century, where a community learned to read the world through images. In an era of overwhelming information, the power of a single, well-chosen image to cut through the noise is more valuable than ever. These statues remind us that the most profound messages are often those that bypass the intellect and speak directly to our shared emotional core. Their ability to evoke empathy, to make us feel the sorrow of a pirate or the serenity of an angel, demonstrates a timeless truth about human connection. We are wired to respond to stories told through the human face and form, a universal language that requires no translation. By learning to decode their silent stories, we sharpen our own visual literacy, becoming more critical readers of the images that saturate our modern lives, from advertising campaigns to political cartoons. The legacy of these stone speakers endures not just in museums, but in the very way we choose to communicate with one another. They gifted us a powerful tool, proving that some conversations are too important to be left only to words. Stone has always been a patient teacher for those who know how to listen. Our journey through the Sculptor's Cipher reveals a world where faith and philosophy were not locked away in books, but were instead carved into the very walls of daily life, a silent language of symbols and gestures that connected an entire community. From the knowing smile of the Reims angel to the terrifying drama of a Last Judgment portal, medieval artists mastered the art of speaking without words, encoding layers of meaning that could comfort a peasant, challenge a scholar, and glorify a patron all at once. This visual literacy was a great equalizer in an unequal world, offering everyone a key to the same profound stories. Today, that key is being reforged in brilliant new ways. Through the precise light of spectral imaging and the reconstructive power of digital modeling, we are not just preserving these statues, we are restarting a conversation paused for centuries, hearing the original vibrancy of their painted messages and the subtle intentions behind each carved fold. This fusion of ancient skill and modern science grants us a deeper, more humbling appreciation for the emotional and intellectual depth of the medieval mind. The true lesson of the cipher extends far beyond the cathedral. It invites us to become better readers of the world around us, to look for the hidden stories in the art we pass every day, whether it is a public monument, a stained glass window, or even the emojis we text. Every image holds a choice about what to say and how to say it. Thank you for exploring this silent language with us. If you enjoyed deciphering history, feel welcome to share your thoughts and discoveries in the comments below.